Hello and welcome to GameSack. It's time to take a look at some more games that people don't seem to talk about very much that I think should get some more attention. And that's it. That's the entire premise of this episode, so let's get started. Here's Atomic Runner on the Genesis from Data East. No one ever talks about this one. It's always Sonic the Hedgehog or Sonic the Hedgehog. Anyway, this is a game where you're almost always running and you can't move backwards. It's a port of an arcade game called Atomic Runner Shell Knob, which plays the same way. But everything here has been enhanced. It's a much better game all around, from top to bottom. You are the scientist Shell Knob. While you were out dicking around like an idiot, your father was attacked and your sister was kidnapped. With his final breath, he tells you the entire story of the alien outlaws. Wow, this is kind of a lot for a single breath. Dad must have some massive lungs. Anyway, you get a suit that gives you superhuman strength and off you go. Now let's talk controls. You can move forward with the D-pad if you press right, however if you press left you'll stand still, but not move backwards. You can fire forwards and backwards. You can set it up so you either have a button that flips directions for you like the arcade, or you can have one button to fire left and the other button to fire to the right. You also have a jump button, and if you press a direction while jumping, your little guy will flip around and shoot as he flips if you're firing. The options menu has a ton of different control options, and Type 3-2 here is the one that I feel is the most natural. It still might take you a few lives before you get used to everything, but you will. There are plenty of things to collect, like J icons to enhance your jumping ability, or up icons to enhance your firepower strength. There are also several different weapon types to collect. Your suit may give you superhuman strength, but it doesn't do anything for your defense. Touch anything and you die. It's pretty easy to do. When you die, you get set back, but usually not too far. Fortunately, there aren't a ton of cheap shots in this game, but it can happen. You can also land on and bounce off of most of the enemies without getting hurt, which is great. Of course, each level has a boss fight. Here, the screen stops scrolling and you can even move to the left. You'll have to fight a couple of them more than once, but it's never exactly the same twice. The game's difficulty is well balanced, and it'll challenge you in the upper levels. The graphics are excellent with good details. Data East also paid some nice attention to the parallax scrolling. I like parallax scrolling. The music is pretty good as well. Not in the top tier of Genesis music, but it doesn't have to be good. This is a cool take on the action platformer genre that can definitely say that it stands apart from the rest due to its crazy controls, but don't overlook it, unless you'd just rather not have fun. And I know some of you don't like fun, especially if it's not on your favorite console. This is Hybrid Heaven from Konami, available now for your Nintendo 64 console. This is such a strange game. First, it begins with a long opening cutscene, long for a cartridge and certainly not short even if it were a disc-based game. It sets up a story that involves replacing the president with a naked guy. You also hear voices in your head and you start killing people. Then they just disappear because it's a video game, what else are they gonna do? Now you're roaming around an underground base and people are calling you Mr. Diaz, but that's all you really have to go on as a player. Don't worry, the story gets more cray-cray the more it goes on. It's almost like Hideo Kojima was involved, at least in spirit. Let's just say that there's a reason the defenses in your own base are attacking you. To deal with them, you hold the R button which draws your weapon, you aim it, and then pull the trigger to fire. You don't gain any experience from this kind of fighting. You'll also find things in crates, like things to restore your life, help in battle, and all that kind of stuff. You spend a large part of the game running around the giant underground maze unlocking doors. Sometimes you'll get into a one-on-one fight. Your firearms won't do you any good here. It's good old fisticuffs. The combat here is menu-driven, which is pretty crazy at first. You choose your attacks and also how you want to respond to enemy attacks. The more full your power meter, the harder your attack will be if it connects. You can also use items to inhibit your opponent's abilities or enhance yours temporarily. Be sure to keep a close eye on your life and use healing items, or it will be game over for you. As you fight, some parts of your body may become damaged and you won't be able to use them as effectively for attacks. Also, you level up parts of your body independently depending on how well you use them in battle. This is weird, but it's also kind of fun in a rather strange way. The game saves, but unfortunately onto one of those controller save pack thingies and not to a battery in the cartridge. I don't know, I've just had issues with the controller packs. The graphics are fine, if typical for the console. I wish there were a greater variety of things to look at, but what's here looks good for the system. It uses the expansion pack, but please don't use it if you want the best possible presentation for this game. Konami just wasn't very good at the expansion pack. The music can be good in spots, and there's some lengthy dialogue here and there. The sound effects are mostly pretty good. I think this game would be more fondly remembered these days if it had action battles instead of menu-driven ones, but don't let that deter you, give it a shot. This next game looks extremely mediocre at first glance, but if you try it, you might accidentally have some fun. Here's Thunder Strike 2 from Core on the Saturn, also known as Firestorm Thunderhawk 2. This is a helicopter combat game that puts you in the cockpit. That's right, you specifically. It's a sequel to Thunderstrike or Thunderhawk on the Sega CD, which was a great game and pretty well regarded. When this one first came out, I rented it, and I was underwhelmed. I had higher hopes for it since I loved the Sega CD game. I never played it again until recently, and honestly, I may have misjudged it. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't the best game ever, but it's way better than a lot of stuff back then. Anyway, you start by choosing an area. Each area has several different missions to complete. Before you start your mission, you can choose which weapons you'd like to bring along. Then, off you go. There are tons of different enemies that you can shoot down, and naturally some of them will be after you as well. You can even take out a lot of the landscape, just like in the Sega CD game. But your main concern are your primary targets. Follow the red line at the top of the screen to seek them out. You can also use the map, but it isn't as good here as it was in the original game. Once you destroy all of the primary targets, then your job is done. Just fly outside of the mission boundary and the stage will end. You have different types of missions, like escort missions from time to time. The game has 3 different types of views, the first being in the cockpit as I've been showing you. There's also a mode that gets rid of the cockpit graphics and cleans things up. And finally, there's a third-person mode. This one is a bit weird because the camera swings around to look at your targets and it can be disorientating, but you can kind of get used to it. Hell, the camera even does this a little in the cockpit mode. Cockpit. The game controls basically just like the original, but it adds support for the Saturn mission stick, which makes it even more fun. Like, lots more fun. Graphically, the game isn't bad for the time, though the draw distance isn't very far. But the frame rate is pretty stable. The sound is fine, but where this game really fails is the music. The first game had great music, and you can hear it. This game also has music, but it's not great, and you can barely hear it in some stages. I think if it had better music, I would have spent more time with it back when I rented it, and maybe even bought it once I figured out this game is actually pretty fun to play. Seriously, never underestimate the effect on music in games. This game is also on the PlayStation. It's identical in every single way, except for the ways that it isn't. The main way that it differs is that it hides the shallow draw distance much better, but things can still pop in here and there. Also, it doesn't support the PlayStation analog joystick or any analog controls at all. But it's still a fun game. Check it out.
Main target dead ahead. Repeat, main target dead ahead.
This is Master of Monsters on the Genesis from Renovation. It was originally developed by System Soft and ported to the console by Opera House. This is a hexagonal strategy game that's on a lot of different Japanese platforms, but it only came to the West on the Genesis, and only in North America. That's right, get wrecked, Europe! That's not really an issue these days, though. Anyway, you can play a campaign mode and it starts you out against a single opponent, and you'll probably get wrecked yourself the first time you play. Basically, you're the master, and you can't wander away from your home base at all. So, you create monsters and soldiers of different types and abilities to do your dirty work for you. Some monsters can fly over mountains, for example, while others cannot. Some can swim while others can't. You get the idea. Like with most strategy games, you do everything you can do and then end your turn. After that, you watch your opponent go through their moves. The first thing you want to do is occupy the towers that are on the map. The more of these that you occupy, the bigger of an army you can create, so try to make these a priority. Of course, the enemy can always take over one of your towers. That's not good for you. The main goal, of course, is to kill the enemy's master. These guys have 100 hit points and they are super tough. You can also play one of several different maps where there are 4 masters playing at once, each with a different color. I'm blue here, by the way. You can even play 4 players just by passing a single controller around. I think this mode with 4 masters is a great way to learn the game because you can see what your opponents are doing. They also attack each other instead of just going directly at you, which gives you some sort of hope. Your monsters get experience for every battle they participate in, and yes, they even level up. Their form changes when they level up, which is pretty cool. You also have magic, which can do things like heal, a special attack, or self-defense for your master's area. There's also Force, which is basically an elemental being that you can have attack enemy monsters anywhere, except for the masters. It is absolutely vital that you learn how to use this well if you want to succeed. Be careful though, as your Force has a life bar and it can die. Both your Force and magic, as well as your ability to create new soldiers, are dependent on if you have enough points and stuff down here. It's usually not an issue though. Also, if one of your monsters dies in battle, you can create a new one to replace him as long as you haven't lost any towers. A single map can take a couple of hours to finish, but you can increase the game speed to help out a tiny bit with that. Once you kill the first master, things become a lot easier because by then the other masters probably have at least a small chunk taken off of their life bar. It also becomes a lot more fun as now the other 2 opponents are more focused on you. That's okay though, I have my tactics and I will surely win. And hell yeah, I did! Destruction for you, you sorcerer mofo! You gotta be careful though, as you only have a limited number of turns. I kinda feel this part is a bit unnecessary. I mean, your opponents are using the exact same amount of turns as you are. What's the point? I just wasted 2 hours. The graphics aren't anything special at all, though they do change a teeny tiny bit depending on the terrain. The music, however, is excellent, with each master having their own theme that plays during their turn. You can change these around if you want. The music was done in part by Hitoshi Sakimoto, you know, the Midnight Resistance and Gauntlet 4 guy. The PC Engine version looks better as everything is bigger and more clear, but the battles themselves are extremely slow. Then, also, there's the issue of the entire game being in Japanese, and it's not a small issue. There's also a Neo Generation version for the Saturn and PlayStation, which I can't figure anything out in. It might be good though, I don't know. So yeah, just stick with the Genesis version. Overall, this is an excellent strategy game that hardly anyone ever mentions because, you know, Shining Force is also on the system. Y'all remember those old single-screen arcade games that were popular before scrolling was invented? That's what we all wanted on our powerful new 16-bit consoles, right? Well, y'all should have wanted this one. Here's Galaga 90 from Namco on the TurboGrafx-16. It was called Galaga 88 in the arcade and on the PC Engine. It was released on the TurboGrafx in 1989, they just future-proofed the name. And by 90, they mean 2390 because this game takes place way in the future when we're gonna have kooky space battles and stuff. The gameplay is standard Galaga, except even more awesome. The original Galaga, as you know, as most people know, is the follow-up to Galaxian. Yeah, I think most people know that. Everybody except maybe like 3 or 4 people know that. And Galaxian was an attempt to take Space Invaders and make it way better, which it did. In fact, it was originally meant for this game to be pronounced as Galaga, as in Galaxian, on which it's based. But most people just call it Galaga, so that's what stuck. I think it sounds better, and it's a little bit easier to say, which is a plus since I'm extremely lazy. Anyway, as you can see, you stay on a single screen shooting down all of the enemies and then you advance to the next screen. Some enemies combine to form a giant version of themselves that takes a bunch of hits. Sometimes you'll have bonus rounds called galactic dancing. Each one of these has their own unique songs and the aliens dance and you're in no danger of getting hit at all. The more you shoot down, the more bonus points you'll get. It's certainly tougher than it looks to get all 40 of them. During the regular stages, you also have the chance to collect these blue capsules. If you have at least 2 of these at the end of a galactic dancing stage, you'll warp to a new area. Sometimes when this happens, you'll get a continuously scrolling screen with music, just like a real vertical shooter, though you're still locked at the bottom of the screen. During these, you'll have to stop and contend with groups of enemies, defeat them, and move on. There's even a boss at the end! Occasionally, an enemy will attempt to capture your ship with a tractor beam. If they succeed, your ship is gone and you need to dip into your remaining lives, but you can recapture it. If you can get it back, you'll get a double fighter. Normally, I'd recommend using rapid fire for this game, but being careless with it might make you destroy your own ship when this happens. Oh well, just use one button for rapid fire and leave it off for the other. You can even begin the game as a double fighter, but you only get 1 life remaining instead of 2. Seriously though, this can help out a lot, especially with those galactic dancing stages. It does make you a bigger target though. A red capsule will give you a triple shot, which is crazy awesome. You can also achieve this by letting your dual fighters get captured. The game offers multiple paths depending on if you collect the blue capsules or not. The higher dimensions have tougher enemies, and you can even get a higher score if that's what you're after. The graphics here are nice, for a Galaga game. They're nothing less or more than they need to be. The sound and the music are great, especially when the enemies die. The TurboGrafx 16 excels at these pleasant sounding and funny sound effects. Overall, this is the best Galaga game ever made as far as I'm concerned, bested only by the arcade original. And really, this version isn't that far off at all. I imagine this one got looked over because it wasn't exactly what most people wanted from their brand new fancy next generation video game machine at the time. But hey, we're over that nonsense now, we just want good games. This one is incredibly fun, and it's another one that I wanted to include in my TurboGrafx 16 Top 10 video. While I'm talking about Galaga, I want to give a shout out to another overlooked game, Cosmo Gang the Video for the Super Famicom. This home port of the arcade game was only released in Japan, and I covered it in the very first Left in Japan video a little over 12 years ago. This takes characters from one of Namco's earlier IPs and applies the Galaga gameplay to it, only this one is crazy fast. You don't need a fighter capture to get the double shot, you just need to shoot down the boss guy carrying the twin cannons. You can also collect a few different power-ups, like the spider web which slows down the enemy movement for a bit. Or this one, which pops up and scares the enemy, making them paralyzed with fear for a few seconds while you take them out. Each stage has different graphics, and there's also music as you play. And they can have a lot of variety since this game is 8 mega power!
8 mega power! Kind of a lot for a game like this!
Yeah, so anyway, there's bonus stages here, but it's not galactic dancing. You need to prevent these guys from stealing energy, which is conveniently stored in these boxes that they're trying to drag back to their area. Overall, this game is a bit tougher than Galaga 90, but it's still incredibly fun. I first played this on a Super Nintendo emulator, and at the time I had no idea this even existed. So I had to import the real cartridge right away. Remember back then when things were so simple and we could just grab a game from eBay for cheap? Not anymore, not with all of these stupid YouTubers talking about video games. Man, I wish nobody talked about games ever. That sure would make this hobby a lot easier to gatekeep. Here's Bomberman Hero on the Nintendo 64 from Hudson Soft. This plays quite differently from your normal Bomberman games. Some bad guys have done some stuff, and now you need to set things right. It doesn't matter, as the story isn't going to make or break this game for anyone. You have multiple different planets to traverse. Each of those have several different areas, and each of those with a bunch of individual levels. At its heart, this is a 3D platformer. In fact, it started development as a bonk game. Remember Bonk? Of course you do. But it was switched over to Bomberman and it might be better for it, but who knows how it would have played as a Bonk game. You have an unlimited amount of bombs that you can toss in 8 directions. Aiming these can be a bit difficult sometimes, as the game will have Bomberman toss them slightly askew of where you thought you were aiming. You will eventually get a feeling for it though. You can also set a bomb in place and blow it up in a few seconds. You can collect power-ups to toss bombs more quickly or increase their firepower. Be careful though, as you can get hurt by your own bomb blasts. If you're just tossing them super fast, the explosions will get closer and closer to you. That's not good. Fortunately, you have a life bar and you can take a few hits. You can collect some icons to get life back, or jewels and stuff like that. In this game you can jump, as no doubt you've noticed as you've been watching my gameplay up to this point, and you don't need me to point it out for you like you're some kind of idiot. That said, jumping is pretty unusual for a Bomberman game. You'll have some special stages like flying or zooming around underwater. The controls here change, but you'll figure it out. Hell, you figured out that Bomberman can jump in this game before I told you, so I know you're smart. The good news is that you have unlimited continues, which basically means unlimited lives. Just be sure to quit the game back to the title screen before you're done, or it won't save. The game's level design is fairly typical of the time, which means it can be cheap in a few areas, but you've got to look past some of that. The boss fights are fun to figure out, though they can take a lot of hits. Even with that though, a few of them are pretty easy. There's a lot to collect and explore here, and you won't gain access to all of the levels unless you find everything in the other levels. You get assigned a number of points when clearing a level, anywhere from 1 to 5. You can go back and replay any level if you've missed anything. The graphics are fine for the console, pretty typical stuff, and it doesn't really stand out in any way, but like I said, that's fine. Unfortunately, this one comes with a lot of frame droppage sometimes, and it can get pretty chunky if too much is on screen. I also had difficulty judging depth on a few occasions. Fortunately, the unlimited lives kind of nullifies any frustration caused by that, but it could have been a little better in that area. The music features a fantastic drum and bass soundtrack, and it reminds me a little of Shock Troopers on the Neo Geo, only different. It's good stuff, and I'm glad it's good because there's not a ton of different tracks here. The sound quality is excellent for a cartridge game. Lastly, this might be the only Bomberman game without a multiplayer mode that exists, at least on a real console, not on a phone or something. So yeah, it's certainly not a perfect game, but it is fun, and people seem to rarely bring it up. Give it a go. It's way better than a lot of 3D platformers for the Nintendo 64. And there you go, some more games that I think you should love more than you do, unless of course you have some love for them already. And even if you don't like the strategy game genre, I still demand that you like Master of Monsters every bit as much as I do. It's completely unacceptable that any opinions would be different than my own. Anyway, what are some games that you think are overlooked? Let me know, and in the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack. Why is it so foggy in here? Whoa. What is that? Introducing the Nintendo 64 video game system. Nintendo offers the latest in 64-bit fog technology. Immerse yourself in 3D worlds where you can kind of see nearly 30 feet away. Real gamers love fog, and we've designed this console especially for you. Nobody likes good color and clarity. Muddy, soft, and foggy are the graphics of the future. Nintendo 64. Wow! Because a clear field of view is for complete losers.